welcome everyone, Mickey Huff.
Tonight's event, of course, as you know, the 17th Annual Izzy Award, as Marcy said, the first in person for, I believe, 6 years. And it's, of course, the Izzy Award is named after the legendary muckraker I.F. Stone, right? From I.F. Stone's Weekly. Big round of applause for the legacy of Izzy Stone. It's the kind of journalism that Izzy did for years, the way he bucked the system, the way he just followed the stories that needed to be told regardless of the consequences. Really, he led by example. And there are many other examples of muckraking journalists, independent journalists in our history. I'm very fortunate to teach an entire course on them here, on independent media. And I think that that's a really important part of journalistic education, is to remind us of those important principles and values. And that's what we're celebrating this evening. We're celebrating this year's amazing Izzy winners. And you're going to get to see and hear from all of them. And we have a great array of people coming up, luminary people in media themselves, that are going to be coming up here to bestow these really significant awards on these amazing independent reporters that have come from all over the country and, in fact, all over the world. And so we're starting this evening with a memoriam, with a commemoration, and with a remembrance of the very, very important work of Robert W. McChesney. And I want to welcome Victor right now to say a few words about the late, great Bob McChesney.
So great. It's such an honor to be here with so many great journalists and so many people who care about great journalism. And I've been asked to say just a few remarks about our dear friend, the renowned media scholar and activist, Bob McChesney, who passed away last month. Bob was my academic advisor, but he was so much more than that. He was my mentor, my comrade. In many ways, he was my personal life coach. So I'm going to miss him terribly, and I could stand up here and sing his praises all night, but I will keep it brief. But it is very fitting to honor him at the Izzy's. It was an institution that he cared so deeply about. Bob was an Izzy judge for many years, but more than that, he was an unflinching champion for the kind of journalism that I.F. Stone represents. Journalism for social justice, journalism that can change the world. Bob once said in an interview that, quote, "I want 1,000 I.F. Stones combing Washington and Wall Street, investigating power." And that's what Bob dedicated his life to, not just cheering on the next generation of I.F. Stones, but working tirelessly toward reforming our entire media system at a deep structural level to help ensure that the kind of journalism being honored here tonight isn't the exception, it's the norm. Bob spent his life's work focused on this project, from co-founding Free Press, the largest media reform organization in the country, to authoring dozens of books on the political economy of news media. He fought for a system that treated journalism as the public good that it is, as a service to democracy and justice. He called on us to support independent media in any way that we can. And above all else, he reminded us that it's our media, not theirs, not the corporations, not just the wealthy, but belongs to us all. So it's in that spirit that I ask us all to remember Bob McChesney, and to honor his legacy by carrying on the struggle for the journalism that we all need, for the kind of journalism being honored here tonight. Thank you.
With that, I would like to welcome to the stage Jeff Cohen to talk a little more about Bob McChesney and also bestow our first Izzy Award this year. Jeff Cohen.
It's great to be back in Ithaca. I came to the college in 2008, largely because Bob McChesney connected me up with Adelaide and the Park Center for Independent Media, which was just an idea. It was not reality. Bob was a great friend. He was an Izzy Award judge almost every year since we launched the award. He spent his whole life not only fighting for a more diverse democratic media system, but for a fairer, more decent society. Every one of Bob McChesney's books enlightened us about media consolidation, about the negative and sensorial impacts of an information system increasingly dominated by giant amoral corporations. I thought of Bob when we saw the billionaires who control the internet beaming from the front row of Trump's inauguration. And I thought of Bob in recent months as media corporations have been lavishing Trump with what amounts to multi-million-dollar bribes to settle harassment lawsuits that Trump could not possibly win in a court of law. In a democracy, media have to be counted on to expose government and corporate corruption. Our mainstream media system is part of that corruption, which is why independent, non-corporate news outlets and independent journalists like the ones who have won the award today, why they are so much more important than ever. Our first Izzy Award tonight goes to the unique publication Jewish Currents for its coverage last year of the slaughter of civilians in Gaza, including a brilliant article by the Palestinian American writer with roots in Gaza, Sarah Aziza, and for its in-depth coverage of the broader Israel-Palestine issue, and for its coverage last year in our country of the repression and smears against anti-genocide, pro-Palestinian dissenters, especially against students, many of them Jewish students. The Izzy judges praised Jewish Currents for offering, quote, an essential counterpoint to a restrictive public conversation about Jewish politics, culture, and identity. Its coverage recalls the best of I.F. Stone, unquote. Accepting the Izzy Award on behalf of Jewish Currents is its senior reporter, Alex Kane. Alex has had his work published all over the place, The Guardian, The Nation, Fair.org, In These Times, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you so much, Mickey and Marcy, and for everyone here. Thank you so much for having me and for giving Jewish Currents an Izzy Award. It's truly inspiring to be given an award named after Izzy Stone. The groundwork for Trump's anti-Palestinian McCarthyism was laid by the Biden administration and the Democratic Party more broadly, alongside mainstream Israel advocacy organizations. Democratic Party rhetoric may have differed from Republicans on the margins, but both parties shared the same premises. For instance, 133 House Democrats voted for legislation last year that would mandate that the Department of Education, while investigating allegations of anti-Semitism on campus, use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, better known as the IRA definition. That definition conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. 21 Democrats, amid the Columbia University encampments last year, urged Columbia trustees to, quote, act decisively to end the protest. This was the Democratic Party and liberal institutions more broadly helping propagate the idea that pro-Palestinian speech and activism was anti-Semitic and that there was a need for a muscular response to such activism. Now, as Trump adopts those very same premises and uses them to enact an authoritarian assault on civil society, some mainstream Democrats are getting cold feet. Take Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, for example, senator from this state as well. Last week, Schumer and 4 other senators sent a letter to Trump decrying his assault on universities, which the president has justified by citing anti-Semitism on campus. Quote, stop disgracefully weaponizing anti-Semitism to attack universities, Schumer said. Well said. And yet in his new book, Anti-Semitism in America, released last month, the senator charges Columbia University with, quote, a widespread failure to discipline both faculty and students who engaged in overtly anti-Semitic activities. He said this despite Columbia's troubling measures, such as banning Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace, calling in the NYPD to break up the student encampment, and suspending and expelling many student activists. Schumer is emblematic of a Democratic establishment that helped whip up a manufactured panic over anti-Semitism on college campuses, only to now lament the consequences of that panic when power is placed in the hands of a demagogue. At Jewish Currents, we have spent much of the past 19 months, since October 7th, chronicling this worrying trend, in which liberalism and its avatars eagerly advance anti-Palestinian repression. In fact, it was the subject of much of the work that we submitted for the Izzy Awards. Will Alden's investigation, entitled Defunding Dissent, exposed how liberal philanthropists who generously funded causes such as abortion care were withdrawing financial support over abortion funds' opposition to Israel's bombardment of Gaza, which many experts call a genocide. My piece reported on how the Biden administration, in using Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to stifle dissent on college campuses, had handed Trump a potential instrument of repression that paved the way for future abuses. Indeed, Trump is right now using Title VI as the basis for stripping federal funding from various universities. The scholars, Adam Haber and Matilda Figlerowicz, documented how media outlets such as CNN justified the police crackdown on the encampment movement last spring as, quote, a necessary defense against lawless mobs who pose an anti-Semitic threat to the university, and in so doing, helped create a moral panic around anti-Semitism that would become the basis for stripping federal funding from schools and the rollback of First Amendment protections. We have done this work while keeping our eye on the horrors of Gaza and the transformations the genocide has wrought in Israel, in Palestine, in American Jewish life, and in those who are watching the horrors unfold as we speak. Sarah Aziza's article on what it means to watch a genocide on one's phone probed the limits of witnessing human rights atrocities in Gaza and explored what a more active form of witness might entail, rooted in, quote, embodiment, on sacrifice, mourning, and resisting what is seen. Maya Rosen's piece on October 7th tourism focused on how solidarity tours to the sites where Hamas militants attacked Israel were reinscribing American Jews' sense of victimhood, and with it, solidifying a consensus that Israel's continued aggression was necessary and just. And that's us. We authored numerous investigative reports on the Anti-Defamation League, one of the most influential Jewish groups in the country, documenting how they have ignored and pushed aside their own civil rights division in favor of pushing for repressive speech crackdowns. We audited their anti-Semitism numbers, which many media outlets consider a gold standard, and tracked how their insistence on the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism inflated such figures. We have tracked the ways that the IRA definition has made its way into federal and state law, including hate crimes law and laws banning discrimination in educational institutions. And now the Trump administration is scouring social media accounts of those who want visas to visit the US, instructing consular officials to deny visas to those deemed anti-Semitic under the IRA definition. It won't stop here, as anti-Semitism has become the favored tool on the part of this administration for targeting not just Palestinians, but Arabs, Muslims, progressives, leftists, and other populations deemed a nuisance to Trump's autocratic ambitions. We are now living in a new McCarthy era, with dynamics on display that I.F. Stone would have been all too familiar with. The forces of repression, including the Democratic establishment, right-wing Republicans, and mainstream Jewish groups, are colluding to destroy careers, target immigrants, and lock people up in jail, all to keep U.S. foreign policy on its aimless, bloody track. It is in these moments when American democracy and civil liberties are most under threat. The ideas of the Palestine solidarity movement, that genocide is wrong, that no state has the right to create a regime based on ethnic supremacy, are ideas that threaten American power and the myths that sustain that power. Because if they are wrong in Israel-Palestine, they must be wrong in the United States. The success or failure of civil society's collective pushback against the current authoritarian regime will be the measure of how strong American democracy is, and indeed, whether it will survive yet another moment of far right-wing reaction. We don't yet know how this story will end. But I know that Jewish Currents will continue to chronicle these dangerous attacks and to write the first draft of history. Thank you very much.
We are honored to be presenting this Izzy Award to the San Francisco Public Press for their incredible investigative series, Exposed: the human radiation experiments at Hunter Point. This phenomenal 8-part series is a perfect example of why social justice-driven journalism is so essential. Through muckraking research, the reporting team reveals how the US Navy carried out harmful radiation experiments on thousands of people without their consent at the San Francisco Naval Radiological Defense Laboratory.
I was lucky enough to talk to Michael earlier today during lunch, and Rebecca as well. Michael talked about how this reporting came to be after 24 years of carrying around milk crates of records and 7 years of reporting work. Hearing how this came together really proves how crucial independent media outlets are to the communities that need them, not just as a public record, but as a tool for accountability. A huge congratulations to Rebecca, Chris, Michael, and the phenomenal editorial team at the San Francisco Public Press.
Congrats!
Hi, everyone. This is going to be a team effort. I'm going to go first. My name is Chris. And as for what we did, I think it was fall of 2017 when Michael told me that he had something interesting in a box in his attic. He had some old papers from the Atomic Research Lab that the U.S. Navy ran at the shipyard in town. First, let me try and set some of the context. Years before, I had been spellbound by a series in SF Weekly, an alt weekly where I'd later work, by Lisa Davis, who documented the massive amounts of radioactive material that the Navy used at the shipyard and at its lab. They had weapons-grade plutonium, they had uranium, you name it, and it was all there within city limits. And that shipyard, by the way, had been for generations the biggest real estate story in San Francisco. It's also located in the city's most disadvantaged neighborhood, a place that shocked James Baldwin when he saw it in the early 1960s, and a place that shocked me when I started reporting on it in the late aughts. But the shipyard was something else. It was a fenced-off, toxic, no-go zone within a no-go zone. How did it get like that? What did it do to the neighborhood exactly? There were a lot of crazy stories and rumors, and there were and are a lot of sick people. But back to that box. What was in it were papers that Michael had fetched for himself from the archives after the SF Weekly story. And they had a smoking gun, he told me, proof that the Navy had done some secret radiation experiments down at the lab. I didn't tell him this then, but I was kind of skeptical. Well, they weren't very well-kept secrets if they were in a box in his attic, but I agreed to take a peek at them and deliver, within a few months, a couple thousand words. Becca had already done most of the podcast about the neighborhood's present. What I was going to offer was a kind of diversion, a little peek into the past. What else can you say other than there was more than one box? There were hundreds upon hundreds. His box led to more boxes, which led to more archives and even more boxes. And we know there are documents that we didn't get, either because various government agencies or archives insisted that they didn't have them, because in some cases they are still classified, or because Michael got sick of hearing about more boxes. I've become fond of saying that if we turned over every page like Robert Cairo instructs, I'd probably still be in the archives. So I'm thankful that at some point we had to produce something. And what we did get was plenty disturbing. The U.S. Naval Radiological Defense Laboratory, in the height of the Cold War, exposed at least 1,073 people to radiation, with many of them given no choice in the matter. And since nobody knew for certain what even low levels of exposure do to the human body, no hope of giving informed consent. You need to know the risk for a study to be ethical. And of those, we know of at least a couple hundred people who got doses big enough to almost certainly cause them health problems later in life. Almost certainly because radiation exposure is a perfect crime. It's very hard to say for certain what causes this cancer or that autoimmune disease, and most of the victims are long gone. Most, but not all. That land is still contaminated today. There are many people in that neighborhood who believe that it may explain why they and their families are sick, sicker than others, with some of the worst health outcomes in the Bay Area. That's partially why I think the story is still relevant today. But it's also about an institution and the decisions it made decades ago. It reminds us that institutions are made up of people who make decisions, sometimes difficult ones, and sometimes careless or selfish or ignorant ones, the consequences of which are felt for generations. And here, in the Navy, was an institution that was careless, selfish, and reckless all at once. After World War II, the Navy was scared and thought it was on its way out. It wasn't relevant anymore, so it tried to get a piece of the atomic bomb. When it did, things got way out of hand. So it doubled down and brought a radioactive problem back to California, so it could take full advantage and extract something out of the problem, despite a clear human cost. The Navy got what it, spoiler alert, the Navy got what it wanted. To this day, it can deploy by itself more nuclear warheads than any country aside from Russia, China, France, and the UK. I don't know if San Francisco or America got much out of the bargain. I do have some tolerance for some of the individual scientists who ran some of these experiments that we documented. They were in a wartime scenario, facing an existential threat. I don't think that excuses what they did, but it does illustrate, as I.F. Stone said, what a devil's bargain and utter madness the nuclear enterprise was and has been from the very start. It also reveals the nuclear enterprise's sinister irony. Possessing these weapons has cost us, Americans, dearly. We have sickened ourselves. Because of this, there are now 450 acres of land in San Francisco that, if not unusable, are at least limited in potential for a human eternity. In this way, decisions made a lifetime ago make our world worse. The housing crisis is worse, income inequality is worse, systemic racism is worse. It is truly the worst of us, and we are stuck with it. And this happened all over the country and all over the world. It has followed us like a curse. And maybe it should. Rather than use this spectacular treasure, the post-war era, showered on the United States, or recoil with horror at what we did to civilians in Japan, we pursued a destructive force to rival nature's, at the cost of bankrupting cities and sentencing our people to austerity and misery. Such hubris. And here's where I get really dark and bleak. The thing is, our project failed. We didn't get the whole story. I can't tell you exactly what the lab did to San Francisco and to generations of people who live there. That is because we don't know. It hasn't been studied. We only got the Navy's era. That is an institutional failure. The Navy never investigated what the lab did to its people past its property line, nor is the Navy trying to answer the question of what the lab's legacy is doing to people now and who might live there in the future. I don't think it wants to know. The problem is not enough people are pressing the Navy to make it known, and that includes the city's elected representatives. Among them, some of the most powerful people in America, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, and if the governor of California has his way, the next president. I think they're not pressing the question because not enough voters are forcing them to ask it. This makes me wonder whether we did a good enough job. I'd like to think that it just means the job is undone. Maybe someone listening to this will finish it. Maybe they're not even born yet. Whoever it is and wherever you are, I'm in your corner and I'll be cheering you on. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to express my deep gratitude and say how humbling it is to receive an Izzy Award. This project came from working many long hours on nights and weekends outside of my day job over the course of years. So it's just incredible to have these efforts recognized. I produced a 2-part podcast for the Exposed series, and what was most important to me as I approached this work was centering the voices of people living nearby the Hunters Point shipyard. The environmental justice advocates who I interviewed are part of a multi-generational effort to have the radioactive contamination at this site addressed properly and to protect community health. One resident told me that she and others engaged in this work often felt they weren't being taken seriously by federal and local officials. She said it often felt like they were being treated as if they couldn't understand the science or like they were overreacting. For example, I had long heard stories about an underground fire that nearby residents saw flare up at the shipyard one night, a blaze of many colors. I was told that the people who called the health department were simply advised not to worry about it. So as I approached this podcast, I wanted it to be one that would take residents' voices seriously rather than dismissing them. The first episode includes a clip of Marie Harrison sounding off at a 2017 community meeting. You can hear her saying, "Now you know what a lie sounds like. This is a lie." She was talking about the Navy. Marie was a prominent advocate affiliated with Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. She passed away in 2019 from a chronic lung disease that her doctors suspected was precipitated by toxins. Today, Marie's daughter, Ariane Harrison, has taken up the cause of fighting for a complete remediation at the shipyard. But Ariane faces even greater complexity, as projections of sea level rise at the site mean that underground toxic elements could push their way to the surface in a flood event and create entirely new exposure pathways. Chris and I agreed that for our talk, he would cover the past, as in all the way back in the Cold War era, while I would focus on the present. Well, present is a subjective term. After all, the shipyard was designated as a federal Superfund site in 1989. The remediation project has been underway for close to 4 decades now. So we'll go back in time only by about 30 years. In the second episode of the podcast, you actually hear a clip of President Bill Clinton speaking at a press conference about the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments. That committee was convened in 1994 to study revelations of experiments that intentionally exposed humans to radiation conducted by government scientists. And by the way, that advisory committee never would have formed if it hadn't been for the award-winning work of investigative reporter Eileen Wellsome, who we also interviewed for this podcast, who authored the book The Plutonium Files, America's Secret Medical Experiments in the Cold War. In 1994, President Clinton also took another action that relates to our story. He issued an executive order calling on federal agencies to address environmental justice. So this meant that the movement's core principle of guaranteeing equitable access to a healthy environment would start to begin to, inform federal policy. In 2021, President Biden established the White House Office of Environmental Justice, requiring federal agencies to develop policies to eliminate current and historic environmental disparities. Well, nobody in this room needs me to tell them how dramatically things have changed from January of 2021 to January of 2025. On his second day in the White House, President Trump revoked Clinton's 1994 Environmental Justice Executive Order. Since then, the Trump administration has terminated environmental justice divisions at the EPA, closing all regional offices focused on this work. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin has canceled more than 400 environmental justice grants, totaling $1.7 billion, and deep staffing cuts at the EPA are underway now, all of which mean fewer staff scientists who study things like toxic exposure at Superfund sites. Environmental justice advocates like the ones I interviewed for this series are now operating in an environment where even the reference to environmental justice has been scrubbed from federal government websites. But that doesn't mean that advocacy efforts to protect people affected will slow down. At a protest in January of 2025 near the shipyard in San Francisco, environmental and social justice groups cited our reporting, and I could not feel more proud to have contributed to this ongoing fight for health and justice, and could not feel more proud to accept this award. So thank you.
One of the most lucid lines in the Investigative Reporter's Handbook is keep the outrage in sight. When immersing yourself in local accountability journalism, or any accountability journalism, never forget that it matters to human beings. This fill in the blank is killing people, and the world has to know about it, even if no one asked. The result may be an emotionally grueling process, even morbid at times, but it can produce invaluable work. What propelled our project was our team's shared outrage that the community could lose its collective memory of a time when, in the name of Cold War military readiness, some souls were expendable, that people entrusted with power could make such unethical decisions. But even with many of the victims long gone, their stories could help our democratic society avoid repeating the same mistakes. Large, well-endowed journalism institutions may seem to have advantages in carrying out elaborate team projects, but this may be an area where independent media has an edge, even if the results are less flashy and take longer to publish. We are honored to receive the Izzy Award, whose spirit reverberates in many small newsrooms that still speak truth to power 90 years after I.F. Stone first started warning America about the rise of fascism. Current events are a stark reminder that there will likely never be a time when the muckrakers can rest. Investigative reporting isn't a business. It's a knot in your stomach that won't let go. The feeling that someone must tell the truth and there's no one around who's going to do it for you. We didn't do this for the clicks or the clout. We did it because the story mattered, and that's what makes independent journalism indispensable. Thank you.
The work that Max and Steve have done highlights not only the aftermath of the horrific and totally avoidable train derailment in East Palestine, but just as importantly, it highlights what we say in mutual organizing, that the system does not keep us safe, we keep us safe. And we have far more in common with each other than any of us has in common with our so-called leaders. In a system that values human life, or really any life, you wouldn't have the term sacrifice zone. That term only exists because the grotesque sacrifice of life, both human and otherwise, is profitable. It's acceptable and it's expected. It's promoted and it's maintained while the structures that would support life rapidly crumble around us. The kind of reporting that Steve and Max have done is not only, therefore, an act of powerful, independent journalism, it is in fact an act of community organizing. It is an act of building beyond the borders that we are told and programmed to believe in and respect. The blue-red divide, the rural and urban divide, the cultural and racial divides. It is a systemic analysis, an amplification of an anguish that echoes across sacrifice zones throughout this nation and indeed the world. It is a reporting that refuses to forget. It refuses to accept the trauma-porn 24-hour news cycle. This is the kind of work that journalists of, for, and by the people do. And as Terry Steele noted, it doesn't really matter what you call it, it just matters that we do it. So therefore, it is an honor for me to bestow this award to Maximillian Alvarez and Steve Mellon.
I wanted to start by just really thanking the Park Center and to the whole award committee for honoring the Real News Network with this Izzy Award. And I want to thank all of our supporters, everyone over the years whose donations, big and small, continue to make our work possible. And I want to thank the Kitty Ploss Foundation and TM Scruggs as well for your tireless support of independent media and for believing in the Real News Network from the very beginning. To everyone who has stood with us, our scrappy, fiercely dedicated team of former factory and service workers, prisoners, students, adjuncts, and community organizers who have become journalists would not be here without you. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And on behalf of the Real News Network and our entire team of grassroots journalists and movement media makers, I am beyond grateful and humbled to accept this prestigious award. I am equally honored to share this award with Brother Steve Mellon of Pittsburgh Union Progress, who co-hosted the report with me and who has frankly done more in-depth, consistent, and humane coverage of the East Palestine train derailment and chemical disaster than anyone else in the country, all while he and his colleagues have been on strike at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette since October of 2022. And I want to take this moment to say that the Real News continues to stand in full solidarity with our striking colleagues. We condemn the illegal strike-breaking and union-busting actions of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's owners, and we call on our fellow media organizations to do the same. And of course, and most especially, I want to thank the people of East Palestine for opening your hearts and homes to me, to Steve, and filmmaker Mike Bolanek, and for trusting us to share your stories with the world. We will not forget about you, and we won't stop reporting until you get justice. And I can assure you all here that we are a long, long way off from that. I have to take this opportunity to reiterate the same plea I've been making for 2 years now. Please don't forget about East Palestine. Don't look away. Don't give up on these people, as so many politicians and pundits and unaffected members of the public have. None of these residents did anything to deserve this nightmare. They did not cause it, yet they are the ones paying the unimaginable price for the corporate and Wall Street greed and government negligence that did. They are working people just like you and me. They are our neighbors, and their lives and community will never be what they were before February 3rd, 2023. They are still sick, still worried about the chemicals accumulating in their bodies and the bodies of their children, still being lied to, gaslit, and abandoned by the company Norfolk Southern and by their own government. Still traumatized and financially devastated from the avoidable catastrophe, and they desperately need help. So please, I beg you, help them. Share their stories everywhere you can. Hold their poisoners accountable for their crimes. Use your voice to advance residents' demands that a federal disaster declaration be issued for East Palestine, which neither the Trump nor the Biden administration has done. And break the cages in your hearts and on your eyes that keep you from seeing the human beings behind these headlines and how much more we have in common with each other than corporate media and corporate politicians would have us believe. This is not a red state or blue state problem. This is a working class problem. As veteran railroad worker Matt Weaver told me after the East Palestine derailment, these long, heavy, understaffed, underinspected bomb trains loaded with toxic materials are blasting past our houses and our kids' t-ball games. They are not passing through the gated communities of the rich. This is about the great many of us who toil to make a living versus the power and profit-hoarding few who take, exploit, and destroy the foundations for life itself. And it's not just happening to the chemically poisoned residents living in and around East Palestine. This life-destroying scourge is coming for all of us. That is what I've learned from interviewing working-class residents living, working, and fighting for justice in America's so-called sacrifice zones. From communities like East Palestine to communities throughout South Baltimore that have been poisoned for generations by rail giant CSX transportation and dozens of other toxic polluters concentrated in their part of the city. To residents of Western North Carolina whose lives and towns were devastated by Hurricane Helene, devastation that was made worse by the effects of mountaintop removal. To residents living near Conyers, Georgia, who have been affected by the nightmare-inducing chemical fire at the biolab facility in September. To rural and urban communities poisoned by industrial animal farming, toxic landfills, oil spills, PFAS in the water, petrochemical plant exhaust, etc., etc. This is what I think doing more means. It means collaborating too with each other so we can carry out our missions in the most impactful ways and better serve and empower the public. Again, that's how this report itself was produced. That is why The Real News is among the founding members of the Movement Media Alliance. All the work that we are doing together is a testament to the fact that with collaboration we can make together what none of us could do on our own. That's what independent media is supposed to be. The whole point is that we aren't ruled by the same corporate prerogatives and professional realities that Steve talks about in our report. The stuff that has traditionally compelled journalists to pump stories out without getting to know the human beings at the center of them. That has made us all see one another as competitors and incentivized us to guard our contacts and our scoops, protect our name brands and all that crap. We can do things differently, and we must. History is calling our number, and we need to answer. We're not just here to keep people better informed about the world as it burns around them. We are here to help them see that they are the ones who are going to save it. And everything we do as journalists and storytellers, and as independent organizations of independent thinkers, bound by stated missions to serve the people, not the powerful, everything we do should be driven towards empowering people to do that. That is our charge. That is the work that we are here to do, and brothers and sisters, we've got our work cut out for us. And we've got a world to save, and we've got no time to waste. So I will see you there on the front lines, and it is truly an honor to be in this struggle with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Max. Those are inspiring words. It's really an honor to be here and, to stand on the stage with Alex, Rebecca, Chris, Michael, my friend Max. I never expected this when I walked out on strike 2.5 years ago, that I would even be still practicing journalism. So this strikes me right in the heart. 2 months ago, I went to a community meeting just outside of East Palestine. There have been several of these. I've been to a number of them. But a woman I did not know plopped down beside me in the empty seat. And she had a knit cap pulled down over her head, tightly over her head, and she looked really weary. And I looked at her and I said, "Are you all right?" And she said, "No." She said, "I'm not all right." She said her kids were ill. She was stressed out. She felt her town had been ruined, poisoned, in her words. She told me she felt like she was having a heart attack every minute of every day. Now, thus began a series of long one-on-one conversations, many at her home, a number on the phone. The young woman is Morgan Parker. She's 38. She wanted people to know her story. For 2 decades, she struggled with opioid addiction. She'd been abused as a child. She'd been involved in a series of bad relationships. Many of her friends died of overdose. In 2021, she experienced her own harrowing overdose, and she survived. She got clean and went into long-term recovery. She got a job. Her kids were living with her. She had a home. Then on the night of February 3rd, 2023, a train derailed and caught fire half a mile from her home. She looked out her bedroom window. The flames, she said, were insane. They were 100 feet high. She said it looked like the whole town was on fire. A number of cars on that train, on that wrecked train, contained highly toxic chemicals. And that disaster upended the lives of thousands, including Morgan and her kids. Morgan and her family were evacuated twice. They would not return home for months. Morgan's kids struggled in school. She was dealing with a difficult commute to work. She had her own health issues. She was stressed out. She lost her job. While we talked, she assured me that she was hanging on. She was holding strong, but it was not easy. Now, the Pittsburgh Union Progress published Morgan's story 3 weeks ago. She received an outpouring of support from the community. Others have come forward to share with her their stories of abuse, an addiction, and of trying to hold their lives together after the derailment. There's a community forming. Morgan's story followed the story of Tom Lewis. Tom is 84, a Navy veteran. He served on the USS Newport News, the flagship of the American fleet during the blockade of Cuba during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. He returned to the East Palestine area, married, and raised a family. On February 7th of 2023, a black cloud from a chemical fire down at the derailment site descended on his property. I don't know if you guys remember, but 3 days after the derailment, the railroad company decided, we'll just dump $30 million of vinyl chloride and burn it off. Vinyl chloride is not a nice chemical, folks. That's the bruise that was left in our atmosphere after that. But the black cloud, the next morning, descended on Tom's property. The fruit from his apple trees turned black the next season. Tom had trouble breathing. Now he needs oxygen to walk to his mailbox. Christine Seisloff's story preceded Tom's. Before that, there was Matt McCandless, Ashley McCullum, R.J. Kissick, Lonnie Miller, Nathan Velez. I could go on and on, folks. These are working class people who lived complex and extraordinary lives of joy, struggle, love, and pain, and then came a train derailment. That derailment was the result of carelessness by a billion-dollar company, Norfolk Southern, which owned the train, and they have since moved on. Morgan and Tom and Matt and Ashley and thousands of others remain to deal with all of the unknowns that follow chemical exposure. Some have decided it is better to move out and are now living in campers while their homes they consider poison remained empty. Some have sold their houses at a loss. Others cannot afford to move out, and so they feel they are stuck. These are people who demand to be heard. They feel the world has moved on and forgotten about them. I can hear them, and I can tell these stories because I joined my colleagues on a picket line 2.5 years ago, and stepped away from corporate media and a paycheck, we, as members of the Newspaper Guild of Pittsburgh, took a stand against an employer blatantly violating federal labor law. On October 18, 2022, at noon, a gloomy gray day, we went out on strike. We organized actions to generate public awareness and support. We raised money to make sure we could pay our bills, and we began publishing our own newspaper. The Pittsburgh Union Progress, or PUP, as we call it, is published by workers for workers. We decide what to cover, not a publisher worrying about shareholder value, not a hedge fund manager. We're community-based. Any ad revenue or donations that come into PUP go to the strike fund and help pay strikers' bills. PUP exists to tell the stories of working class people, whether they're folks dealing with the fallout of a chemical derailment, or nurses, or baristas, or university employees organizing their workplaces, or electricians organizing a strike, or members of the immigrant, or minority, or LGBTQ, or disability communities pushing back against people trying to strip them of their humanity and their rights. We're seeing grassroots organizing in the East Palestine area. Residents are coming together to gather, to share information, to support each other, to push back against those who would prefer that the residents of East Palestine just quietly go away. If PUP and our strike in Pittsburgh has a legacy, it is my hope that they stand as examples that grassroots and community-focused people can organize, they can support each other, and push back against powerful, well-funded organizations that will, in pursuit of profit and increased power, do great harm to our families, to our neighborhoods, our neighbors, our communities. Such resistance is not only possible, it is necessary. So I'm honored to share this award with my friend Max, and I'm grateful and incredibly proud that the judges have decided to honor us with an Izzy.
Mohammed Mhawish was reporting from the most dangerous place on earth for journalists, in the history of journalists, in the history of the world. Just within the first month after October 7th, more journalists had been killed in Gaza than at any time since the Committee to Protect Journalists had been counting when it was established in 1992. Recently, the Palestinian Journalism Syndicate put the staggering toll of journalists and media workers killed in Gaza at more than 200. Those who remain there risk their lives on a daily basis to document what their people are going through, what they go through, and they bear witness to the devastating conditions they are currently experiencing. Mohammed Mhawish was born and raised in Gaza, and he reported on the ground from Gaza for the years leading up to the war and then after October 7th. Mohammed is a journalist, storyteller, and now displaced Palestinian, who wrote numerous firsthand accounts from the front lines of the conflict about his lived experience of Israel's genocidal violence and the terror that it takes on the people and him personally. As a storyteller, he writes about people, their resistance and beauty, and as they live in his memory. In addition to being a contributed writer to The Nation, he also sends dispatches to other outlets such as Plus 972 Magazine, Al Jazeera, and The Economist, and he appears also on MSNBC. He also contributed to the book A Land with a People. Tonight he will be with us on videotape. Thank you.
Hello everyone, it's an incredible honor to be with you today. My name is Mohammed Mhawish, and I'm a Palestinian journalist and writer from Gaza, currently reporting from exile. This recognition comes at a moment when the stakes could not be higher, when we are witnessing not only the erosion of journalists' protection in Gaza, but the deliberate silencing of an entire people's right to speak for themselves. For me, this award isn't just about my individual work, it's an acknowledgement of something much bigger. the urgent responsibility to keep telling those stories, especially now when every effort is being made to bury them. Most of the reporting that brought me here was done while I was still living and reporting from Gaza. Gaza is often spoken about in statistics, number of casualties, number of bombings, number of aid trucks. But for me, Gaza is home. It's a place where life is lived fully, even under siege, even under the worst conditions imaginable. And it's a place where journalism has never been a simple career choice. It is survival. It is an insistence on living and hope. When I first started reporting, I never imagined I would one day be writing in the middle of airstrikes, or that I would be filing stories from temporary shelters with no electricity, no internet, and no certainty that I would live to see the next morning. But that became the reality for me and for so many of my colleagues in Gaza. Every story we publish feels like a small act of defiance, a way of saying we are still here and our voices still matter. Over the past year and a half, the conditions for local journalists in Gaza have become even more dangerous and deadly. The numbers are staggering, the deadliest period for journalists anywhere in the world in recent memory. But behind every number is a person, a friend, a colleague, a human being with dreams, families, and futures that have been stolen. When I think about the friends and fellow journalists we've lost, it becomes clear to me that journalism isn't just about telling the story of survival. It is itself a form of survival. It is a lifeline to the outside world. And when that lifeline is targeted, when the journalists themselves become the targets, it sends a terrifying message that those in power not only want to control the narrative, but they want to erase it altogether. When people ask me how we manage to keep reporting under such brutal conditions, my answer is always the same. Because we have no choice. Because telling our own stories is the only form of agency we have left. Because if we don't tell them, someone else will, and too often those versions are distorted, incomplete, or stripped of our humanity. Being a Palestinian journalist means carrying not only the weight of truth-telling, but the weight of constant misrepresentation. It means pushing back against decades of being spoken about instead of being listened to. It means insisting on our right to narrate our own lives, even when the world seems more comfortable turning away. This award and the recognition it brings isn't just for me. It is for every journalist who stayed behind to document the destruction of our own communities, for those who gave their lives holding a camera, a notebook, or a microphone. It is also for my people, the Palestinian people themselves, who continue to insist on their humanity in a world that too often treats them as disposable. I want to thank the Park Center for Independent Media for this recognition. Thank you for believing that independent journalism still matters, not just when it's easy, but when it's hardest. Not just when it confirms that we want to believe, but when it challenges us to see the uncomfortable truths that we might rather ignore. I also want to thank my family, especially my parents, who gave me the strength to keep going, even when everything around us was collapsing. And I want to thank my fellow journalists in Gaza, both those still standing and those who are no longer with us. Their courage isn't just history, it is happening right now as we speak. I want to sincerely thank the Park Center for Independent Media for this tremendous honor and the judges who believed in the importance of this work. Thank you to everyone who made the Izzy Award possible and who continue to stand behind the values of independent journalism, not just in words, but in action. This recognition means more than I can express, especially at a time when truth-telling is under such grave assault. It is a reminder that even when the world feels indifferent or hostile, there are people who see and who listen and who care. Thank you for seeing us and for believing in the power of stories to break silences and build understanding. As I accept this award, I do so with a heavy heart, but also with determination that the work is far from over, that the stories must keep being told, that truth must keep being documented, and we must never allow silence to take hold. To the people of Gaza,